Next up, we have Tyrantrum, one of the fossil Pokemon in Generation 6. Tyrantrum and its pre-evolution, the adorable Tyrant, were notable for their typing being as unique as it was cool. Many rock types have hinted towards dragon, but they went all the way with the Tyrannosaurus dragon. Tyrantrum's design is also one of interest. Its kingly nature is demonstrated through its crown, and its fringe stems from the theory that the T-Rex actually had feathers. Who knew? Today we're going to examine Tyrantrum's place in the competitive scene. Did it rule with the firm immovability of stone, or was it a tyrant that got toppled? We'll find out as we ask, how good was Tyrantrum actually? But first, before we see how Tyrantrum trained to become viable, train your champ to win races with this video sponsor, Pocket Champs. Pocket Champs is a mobile game where you compete with other players to race your champs. What I like about this game is that it's not a racing game per se, but it's actually a strategy game because the champ will do the race on its own. Now, that may be on the chiller side, but that doesn't make it any less intense. You have to make sure you pick the right equipment for the course and make sure your champ is strong enough to even compete with the others by training them. Coach your champ to unlock its potential by selecting the right training for the upcoming races. Train your champ and give them powerful items. Every time you complete a race, collect rewards, find powerful items, and unlock different champs, and then race again. So if you're interested in Pocket Champs and also want to support the channel to help us produce more content, you can download Pocket Champs for free from iOS or Android by using the link in the description. And if you use our link, we got a special surprise for you. I've partnered with Pocket Champs to offer you guys a starter pack with 1,100 gems, and the gems will be automatically added to your account on September 4th. This reward is worth $10 and is only available until September 3rd. So don't miss out and download Pocket Champs soon. And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Tyrantrum's unique typing piqued some interest at the start of XY, but it ultimately failed to leave any sort of impact on OU. Despite its impressive attack stat and interesting stab combination, it wasn't nearly enough of a sledgehammer to stand out in the hard-hitting OU tier. Its base 121 attack stat was great, but its Stone Edge wasn't anything Tyranitar hadn't been doing for years, and its strongest dragon stab was Dragon Claw. Its strong jaw ability was nice, since it significantly improved the power of its coverage and Fire Fang, but nothing earth-shattering. And that wasn't good enough for something with Tyrantrum's flaws, especially if its speed, while not bad, it certainly was underwhelming. And while its typing was also riddled with highly exploitable weaknesses, severely clamping down in the opportunities it get to do anything. The fairy-infested UU was a similarly hostile environment for it, especially since there was a far superior dragon in High Dragon, and a far superior rock and Mega Aerodactyl. Tyrantrum dropped to RU, and even there it struggled. Its power was more impressive in the lower power environment for sure, but it still wasn't enough to compensate for its flaws. Dragon Dance and Scarf sets were decent, but largely underwhelming. Plus, with how amazing Rhyperior was, there wasn't really much need for another rock, until, funnily enough, it was actually going bulky that gave Tyrantrum its most legitimate role of X and Y RU. Moltres utterly shredded the tier with its dual stabs, and Tyrantrum resisted both and was neutral to its accompanying hidden power Grass. With special defense investment and an assault vest attached, it became arguably the best Moltres check available, which was invaluable given how badly the tier was torched by the Firebird. Then Oraz came around and Tyrantrum received Outraged, a marked improvement in Dragon Stab and its strongest stab move as a whole, boasting an additional 20 base power over Stone Edge, which lent new legitimacy to the late game cleaning capabilities of its Dragon Dance and Choice Scarf sets. Well, technically its strongest move was the stunningly powerful Head Smash, eclipsing even Outrage by a whopping 30% power, but its enormous recoil, which is half of the damage dealt, which would be a lot, ironically making Tyrantrum's strength work against it, prevented it from being any sort of consistent choice. What made this particularly infuriating is that Tyrantrum was known to have the recoil removing Rockhead as a hidden ability, so everyone was just waiting for its release. And a few months into Oraz, that's exactly what happened. Head Smash Tyrantrum was unleashed upon the world, and man, did it smash everything in sight. Banded Tyrantrum was hilariously impossible to switch into, its unwall ability making it an outstanding choice for ripping through defense. There were a few Pokemon capable of withstanding it, like Mega Steelix, Rhyperior, superior Cobalion and Dual Blade, but they didn't exactly want to eat a Banded Earthquake. Banded Tyrantrum's lower speed was easily compensated for with teammate support like Thunder Wave and Switch move spam, but of course the faster Tyrantrum variants, Scarf, Dragon Dance, and even Rock Polish for the extra speed boost to blow past opposing Scarfers, since it wasn't like it was left wanting for power anyway, immediately became among the tier's most defining, ruthlessly efficient late game cleaners that pulverized weakened remains of teams. Tyrantrum's recoilless head smash was utterly hilarious overkill, as it smashed pretty much everything in the tier to smithereens, and what little there was capable of standing up to it wasn't anything Tyrantrum couldn't crush with another move. Nothing was safe. The tier became completely warped around this monster, running around wielding what was effectively a one-hit KO move in most cases, and the player base immediately clamored for its ban. The defensive counterplay to it was unreasonably minimal, pretty much non-existent outside of the unrealistic expectation you could out-offense it. Its banded head smash 2-hit KO'd Bronzong of all things. The player base felt it was just a matter of time until it'd be axed. Eventually, Tyrantrum's go-to check Cobalion rose to UU through usage, and it was decided that enough was enough. Tyrantrum was put up for a suspect test, and its ban seemed imminent. But to the surprise and disgust of many, it wound up remaining in the tier. The reasoning wasn't a complete shock, as of course Tyrantrum's weaknesses didn't disappear upon getting Rockhead, and they were still exploitable, which was just barely enough to prevent it from getting banned. They attempted to adapt and did manage to hang on by a thread against Tyrantrum's relentless assault, but the sentiment was always there, and only grew stronger over time with each Pokemon Tyrantrum's head smash deleted with its absurd, over-the-top strength, and made even more difficult to answer by virtue of its excellent base defense, meaning it was actually quite adept at taking physical hits even without investment, limiting its scope of answers. For example, a Life Orb Hitmonlee Mach Punch, despite hitting it super effectively, would barely scratch Tyrantrum for half damage. For such a strong priority move to do so little against a speed-boosting threat spelled even more trouble for the tier. Tyrantrum's continued meta-shattering power led it to receive a second suspect test, this time alongside Mega Steelix. Both were banned. Tyrantrum at long last earning the tier status many had felt it deserved ever since it unleashed its first head smash sans recoil. Then Tyrantrum didn't do much in UU. It was an okay option as a banded wall breaker, but again, Mega Aerodactyl and High Dragon were just too good all around. So Tyrantrum's far worse speed and exploitable defensive profile meant its usage and niche were rather specific and limited. Funnily enough, it was also tried in OU a few times, although the novelty of its power was quickly overshadowed by its many other flaws. So all in all though, Tyrantrum ruled over RU in Generation 6, making for a thoroughly successful debut generation. Tyrantrum returned to RU in Generation 7. The tier's newly power-crept nature meant it was no longer going to be ban-worthy, but it remained an outstanding metagame-defining force throughout. Its Choice Scarf set was particularly amazing. It held teams together, able to use its newfound speed to offensively check opposing threats while providing an amazing cleanup option late game, without any setup against fast-paced teams. It was especially useful for fending off the likes of Choice Spec Swellow. However, Tyrantrum also made excellent use of Gen 7's new Z moves, providing its Dragon Dance and Rock Polish sets even greater precision in finishing off opposing teams, especially Rock Polish, since the extra power was highly valued on a set whose boosting move only raised speed. It generally boosted one of its two stabs, and whichever it was, the results were terrifying. Outrage getting boosted into Devastating Drake was particularly ferocious since it allowed for an even stronger Dragon Stab that didn't have Outrage's locking in effect, while Head Smash's boost into Continental Crush raised it to an utterly hysterical 200 base power, and its can't miss nature had the benefit of eliminating Head Smash's off frustrating 80% accuracy. Not knowing which Z move it was packing just made Tyrantrum even more difficult to deal with. Of course, good old-fashioned Choice Band remained useful for the peerless levels of pulverizing power it packed with such immediacy. Tyrantrum's excellence in Sun and Moon continued into and throughout Ultra Sun and Moon. Its defensive utility with Choice Scarf was so prized, it actually became an integral part of balance structures. Its speed, power, and resist always lurking to allow such slower-paced teams to strike back and clean up against faster-paced teams threatening to overwhelm it. Tyrantrum contributed to these styles consistently to such a great deal that it not only became a fixture on them, but helped propel them to a place as the most popular, reliable team style in the metagame for quite some time. It anchored structures with Gardevoir, Gligar, Milotic, and either Registeel or Bronzong with incredible efficiency. For instance, it was particularly apt at leveraging its quadruple fire resistance into a makeshift check to Ninetales' Sun and Specs boosted Fire Blast, as well as being effective at checking both of Salazzle's stabs. Scarf Tyrantrum was such a standard that players actually tended to forget it could be one of the scariest Pokemon around. For example, Donphan rose in part because it was an amazing counter to Scarf Tyrantrum, which actually led Tyrantrum to run Toxic on its Scarf set quite a bit. But then Tyrantrum would unleash a Dragon Dance boosted devastating Drake and rip through an unsuspecting Donphan anchored team. However, at the end of the day, Scarf was Tyrantrum's bread and butter set because it was just so incredibly good at providing defensive security against the wide variety of offensive threats in the tier. And it was so good at this because it was so immediately strong, especially for something so fast. And so Tyrantrum was a key staple of Gen 7 RU throughout the entire generation. Tyrantrum didn't appear in Generation 8 until the Crown Tundra DLC, at which point the tiering system was in a state of chaos. As a result, it found itself in NU, which is a hilarious idea. Surely Tyrantrum's head smash would shred such a low tier into ribbons, right? Well, that's definitely not incorrect, as Tyrantrum was a major threat, but this wasn't quite enough to get it the ban everyone expected from it, as the metagame was quite naturally effective against it. When some of the best Pokemon in the tier are Silvally Ground, Mudsdale, and Scrafty, which naturally do well against Tyrantrum, then it's not quite going to be dominant. Tyrantrum particularly mourned the loss of Z-moves in Gen 8. Even the likes of Rotom threatened Tyrantrum quite naturally with its high-powered Leaf Storm against Tyrantrum's low special defense stat. Worst of all, Tyrantrum was an attacker whose moves made contact, which was the least desirable thing ever in a tier dominated by Effect Spore Vileplume. Not that Vileplume was by any means a check to Tyrantrum in and of itself, of course, but when the time inevitably came to sacrifice something to Tyrantrum's monstrous head smash, you could throw Vileplume into it as it lived one, giving it 2 chances for Effect Spore's nasty 30% chance to activate, meaning 51% activation over 2 turns, and you'd have a perfectly good Tyrantrum utterly ruined just for picking up a KO. Flame Body Talonflame could be similarly irritating. Despite the natural hostility of its new environment, Tyrantrum was still a terror if wielded well, especially since Gen 8 had gifted its Scale Shot. Since it can now boost its speed with its Dragon Stab, it could viably run Hone Claws as its boosting, both strengthening itself and removing Head Smash's infuriating mischance. It also received an excellent new coverage in close combat, obliterating the steals that intended to resist its stabs with far greater power than Earthquake. Tyrantrum still threatened the daylights out of tier staples like Xatu, Arcanine, and Salazzle, while not really having any decent long-term answers. There's only so much of such insane power anything can withstand. Tyrantrum was also effective at coming into the likes of Decidueye, Snorlax, and Salazzle at least once or twice, or many more if supported with Wish from the excellent Vaporeon or Sylveon, ensuring it had plenty of opportunity to launch its brutal attacks. It was somewhat strange to see Tyrantrum at its lowest level of viability in a lower tier that it had ever been in before. Additionally, despite not officially being RU anymore, Tyrantrum was still quite viable in the tier. In fact, it was downright ferocious, especially so because it was so easy to forget it existed. Its Scarf set returned and wreaked havoc against Pokemon that otherwise greatly threatened offensive teams, such as Crobat, Raikou, Togekiss, and Noivern, being especially effective thanks to its typing, allowing it to switch into their moves it resisted. Being a Scarfer that had such immense power was also invaluable, since it could very quickly overwhelm many teams whose best rock resist was Flygon, which was the most common rock resist to boot. It just get blown away, overwhelmed by sheer strength. You couldn't play around Tyrantrum with cursory rock resist or bulky physical walls. You needed to be both, and even Steelix and Registeel, which could take on head smashes, were none too thrilled at the prospect of eating close combats. This was just the Scarf set too. Having a Scarfer pose such an offensive threat was incredible, but in case you thought you could get comfortable around its limitation of locking into one move at a time, it would Dragon Dance up and rip through you with greater power and precision. Tyrantrum certainly had its flaws, thanks to its many weaknesses and generally prediction-reliant nature, and Head Smash's accuracy certainly didn't help matters, but it was a strong Pokemon in RU once again. And that's it. So how good was Tyrantrum actually? Well, it's been an RU fixture since it debuted in Generation 6. Even when it was at its weakest in XY, with Stone Edge as its strongest stab, it found a niche with Assault Vest, using its unique typing to take on the tear-scorching Moltres. Then Oraz rolled around, it received Outrage and then the Rock Head ability, and it was off to the races. Tyrantrum's recoilless head smash became its trademark, as with such an insanely powerful move lacking in drawback becoming one of the best offensive weapons around. Well, unless you count the drawback of its accuracy, which could be infuriating. Nevertheless, Tyrantrum was outstanding and just barely missed getting the banhammer, until it was tested a second time, with the player base choosing to send it to RUBL for how absurdly it pressured and overwhelmed the tier. In Generation 7, it was a metagame staple once again, its scarf set particularly notable for holding balanced teams together and vaulting the playstyle to a place of defining the tier, but one would do well to not forget how badly it could obliterate anything in its path with Z-move boosted sweeping sets. Generation 8 was its weakest thus far, and even then, it was great. It had strong placements in NU and RU alike. So all in all, Tyrantrum has been a successful lower tier Pokemon, and will almost certainly continue to succeed if and when it returns to the game. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Tyrantrum? How would you buff it? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone. Also, don't forget to scan the QR code or check out the link in the description below to download Pocket Chance.